I appreciate so much the elders here asking me to fill this pulpit this morning. If I don't accomplish anything else, I'm adding it'll make you appreciate Jerry. I want to thank you for being here, especially a lot of visitors that we have. We have a number of our people out, but you have made up the difference in so many ways, and I appreciate your presence here this morning. We are living in a world of heartache, a world of sorrow, a world of tension, and a world of woe. And I believe, at least in part, for a lack of good old-fashioned kindness. And that's what I want to talk about for a little while this morning. In the international realm, how much better the world would be if the leaders applied God's law of kindness. When I was a young man, very young, I listened to Adolf Hitler on the radio. They said Hitler was probably the most persuasive and intelligent man in the 20th century. What would have happened had he applied God's law of kindness? We know that 6 million Jews lost their life because he was not a kind man. Hirohito, the emperor of Japan, would have never dropped the atomic bomb had he applied the law of kindness. In the Middle East situation this morning, that would be changed in a very short time if the leaders of the various countries would apply God's law of kindness. In our relationship with each other, how different life would be if, in the words of Hebrews chapter 10 and verse 24, we would just consider one another, provoke one another to love and to good works. In our family life, if every member was thoughtful and great and considered every other member, didn't infringe on them simply because we were related. I love the words in Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 32, and be ye kind one to another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, even as God, for Christ's sake, hath forgiven you. Titus 2:10 says, adorn the doctrine. I don't know of any better way to adorn the doctrine than to let the beauty of the gospel shine through kindness. Question, answer this honestly with yourself. Would you say that you're a kind, thoughtful person, kind to your wife, to your children, to your neighbors, and with those that you work? A number of years ago in Houston, Texas, a man was on the radio every day on the streets of Maine and Capitol, and he would ask a question. On this particular day, the question is, do you consider yourself average, above average, or below average? 92% said, I think I'm a little above average. Only 6% said they were average, and only 2% said they were below average. Sometimes we carry one picture in our mind as to how we might look, but something rather different could be the truth. For instance, up in Temple, Texas, some years ago, they were taking a pictorial directory. And they wanted all the ladies to have their picture made. They promised to have it made as many times as they wanted until they got one that she liked. This one particular lady had had her picture made 5 times, and she still wasn't satisfied. She said, maybe you're too close to me. So she moved a little bit closer, and she took 6th and a 7th picture, and she still complained. And finally, he threw his hands up, and he said, lady, this camera just cannot take something that isn't there. The whole picture We carry one picture in our mind as to how we look, when sometimes it's a little bit different from that. Question 2. Do your children think that you're about the kindest father that ever lived? When neighbors talk about you, they say, I'm not a member of this man's church, but he is a good man. He lives his Christianity at home and with his family. What is kindness? It's kind of hard for us to do something unless we know what it is. So I went to the dictionary, and it says, kindness is a chief in the process of learning. Kindness is a quality of benevolence well bestowed toward one another. Synonyms: compassion, clemency, gentleness, generosity. I don't think any of these words is as pretty as kindness, do you? And then I went to the poet and I said, sir, can you tell me what is kindness? And the poet said, kindness is a master key to the lock on every barred heart. Kindness is a Gulf Stream in the North Country. Kindness is the most precious jewel from the mind of heaven. Kindness is a chief foreman in the shop of good works. Kindness is a warm hand clasp of a friend. Kindness is a patch on every blowout. Kindness stations the sun in somebody's sky and a moon in the darkness of their moonlight. Kindness gets results here and in the hereafter. And then I went to the Lord and I said, God, what is kindness? And in his own fine, brief, and pointed way, he said, love suffers long and is kind. We need something to give us a warm glow within ourselves. Nothing in the world can do this like kindness can. When God made man, he said, let us make man in our own image. He made us in his image. That kindness is always there from the day we were born. But just like peas, corn, and tomatoes, it needs to be cultivated. Let us hope that everyone in this audience will help to grow a good crop of kindness this year. The purpose of revealed religion is for us to come like God. On one occasion, the Apostle Paul said, it is no longer I that live, but Christ that liveth in me. If the Bible had never said that God was kind, I would know it, wouldn't you? I see his kindness in 10,000 places. I see his kindness when I sit down to a well-filled table with my family. I see his kindness when I quench my thirst with a cool drink of water. I see his kindness when I look up into the sky and feel the warmth from the sun. We need to be kind because God told us to be kind. He required it. He commands it. In 2 Peter chapter 1, verses 5 through 7, he speaks of brotherly kindness. And then in Galatians 3 and verse 12, he says, put on therefore as the elect of God, holy and beloved, bowels of mercy, kindness, humbleness of mind, long-suffering. And then being in Ephesians 4 and verse 32, be ye kind one to another. Kindness gets results. It wins sometimes when nothing else will. A young lad in the congregation, mother had died. The boy lived with his dad. His dad did a lot of drinking. And one day this little 12-year-old boy was fooling around with a .22 rifle and accidentally shot himself. They rushed him to the hospital, they couldn't find his dad. And they finally found him in a beer joint having a few beers with his buddies. And when they brought him into the hospital, they started railing on him, called him, tell him just how bad they thought he was. But when he walked into that hospital room, his little boy raised up off the bed on his elbow. He said, "Dad, I've been hearing what they've been saying about you, but I don't care. I love you." That's what broke his dad from drinking alcohol. There's an old fable that the sun and the moon got into an argument as to which one was more powerful. And they decided that the man down on earth, the one that made him take his coat off, would win. The wind had the first chance. He began to blow across the back of the man. He just pulled his coat a little bit tighter. The wind said, "I'd blow harder." He blew real hard. The man just tucked his coat in just a little bit more. The old sun came out, sent its warm rays down upon the man's back, and it began to warm up, and off came the coat. Why? Warmth gets results, whether it is with your life shining or with your example that you're going to send. We need something in us to give us a warm spirit and refresh our spirits. Nothing in the world can do this like an act of kindness toward one another and not expecting anything in return for it. The president of Kiwanis International tells this little story about himself. He got off from work one day, a cold winter day, got out to his car, had it warmed up, ready to go home. He looked across the street at an empty building, and his little boy standing over there. And he went over to him, he said, "Son, what's the matter?" He said, "Nothing." He said, "Now, I have a little boy, and I know when something is troubling him. Now, what's your problem?" He said, "Well, Daddy had sent me to the store to get some groceries, and he gave me $1, and some way or another I lost $1. He said, "Well, just go home and tell your dad you lost $1. He said, "No, I can't do that. My dad's drinking, and I dare not go back now." He said, "Well, you'll have to go home." He said, "I'm not going home till my daddy goes to sleep." So he said he had to do something. So he took him across the street, got the groceries for him, had a dime left over, told him to keep that and go on home. He ran out of the store, and in about a minute or so, he ran back in, and he grabbed this man and hugged him around his leg. He said, "I sure wish you were my daddy." He said, "You know, I drove around about 30 or 40 more blocks looking for another little boy that lost $1. Sometimes it can kind of get to you, doesn't it? When you show kindness, it always comes back to you. To whom do you like to do something good for? The person who does you wrong and talks about you and treats you mean? No, we should. But most of the time, we bake a cake or take a dish to someone who brought me one when I was sick. But if we show genuine kindness, it will come back to you. That's a law of life. You never show kindness unless you bless yourself. In our text that Don just read a few minutes ago, in Luke chapter 6 and verse 38, it says, "Give, and it shall be given to you." Now that's a legal measure, isn't it? But he doesn't stop there. He says, "Good measure, pressed down and running over, far more than we could ever expect, will be given into your bosom." We're not talking about a man now that goes out with a selfish spirit and says, "I'm going to do something real nice for somebody so somebody will do something nice for me." That's a spirit of selfishness. Or as a Roman cynic once said, there is no grace in a benefit that sticks to the fingers. David Doran, in his little book that he wrote, "Try Giving Yourself Away," said he was riding on a train from New York to Chicago, and he went back into the dining car to have lunch, and they were having onion soup. Now, he'd always liked onion soup, but this was without a doubt the best he had ever eaten. And he couldn't help but tell the waiter to go back and compliment the chef and tell him how much he enjoyed the soup. And a few minutes later, this man looked around, and everyone in the dining car was having ice cream for dessert, but his was the only one that had strawberries on it. Kindness got back in a hurry. Sometimes it's not that fast. Many of us find it difficult to express ourselves and know how to be kind to each other. It doesn't have to be anything big. Years ago, some of you may remember that song, Little Things Mean a Lot. And in that song, it talked about helping a little lady across the street. Incidentally, that's the way you can tell when you're getting old, when you help that little lady across the street and find out she's your wife. But if you have an urge to do something good, do it. Don't put it off. Many of us have good intention of doing something to show that we're kind, but we put it off, and so many times it never gets done. James LaFan had this suggestion, that we set aside one day a week as Surprise Day. On that day, do kind, thoughtful things for your family and for your friends. You will find new horizons opening up for you. I challenge you to try this for 1 month. On that day, do thoughtful, kind things for other people simply because you want to be. If you are planning a day, a surprise day, young people, don't tell anyone. If you tell, it doesn't count. But on that day, do special things that you normally would not do for people that you know and people that you love. You say, well, what in the world can I do? There are 10,000 things that we can do to show that we are a kind person. But I'll tell you one thing that some of us could do tomorrow morning. We could get up in a good humor and say, this is a day that the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. Becky Burroughs wrote a little tract one time, a better world begins with me. She said she had thought about a better world but hadn't done very much about it. And this particular morning, she brought her husband a cup of coffee while he was still in bed. And he says, am I in the right house? Been a long time since anything like that happened to me. She saw that it pleased him, and she went out and got the newspaper and brought it to him. He said, Becky, what in the world are you up to? And she saw that it pleased him, and she went in and she woke up her son. She says, darling, it's time for you to get up. He walked in a few minutes, tucking in his blue jeans. He said, Mom, did you call me darling? She usually said, now get up there right now, you're going to be late for school. Did any of y'all ever say something like that? You say, what in the world does this have to do with Christianity? Brethren, I believe that has been one of our problems. Christianity teaches us how to live in the various relationships of this life, as well as preparing us for eternity. I was married to a kind, beautiful lady for 52 years. And maybe about once every 10 years, she said, JB, you're the best husband in the whole world. Now, I knew I wasn't, but I wasn't going to argue with anybody as smart as she was. It wouldn't hurt a husband on the day before Surprise Day to write a letter to his wife and tell her just how much she has meant to him all these years. Children, put a note under Daddy's pillow or slip it in his shoe and tell him just how great a dad you think you have. Several years ago, Brother Hopkins in Fort Worth, Texas, wrote a little letter to his parents. he began something like this. Dearest Mom and Dad, many times I've tried to sit down and write this letter, but I've always found I didn't have the words. I wanted to say what I wanted to say. I put it off, and it never did get done. I still don't have the words, but I want you to know what you have meant to me. Dad, many times you have told me that you love me, but I didn't realize how much. But one time when I was just a young boy, we were at a Baylor football game, and I told you just as Baylor was about to score a touchdown that I had to be excused. And you said, son, can you wait a little bit? And I said, no. You didn't yell, and you said, say, I'll never take you to another football game. You even stopped and brought me a cold drink on the way back in the stand. He said, I remember that to this day. I remember on Friday and Saturday night that you let me have the car, and you walked 20 blocks to work, worked all night, and then walked back home. I remember that. I remember when we were in college, my brother and I, and you came to visit us, and you had that old blue suit on. That thing must have been 15 years old. And we told you how much it embarrassed us for you to be wearing that old suit. And he said, well, an old man like me doesn't have to make an impression like you young bucks have to. I know now that you didn't have a new suit because you couldn't afford one because you had two boys in college. He said, Mom, what I remember so much about you is how happy you always were around the house. Never complaining, always smiling, never too old, never too busy to stop and tell us a story. You were always singing around the house. I always took clean socks and clean shirts for granted in my drawer, but I know now how they got there. This old family got that letter. They said, we have a nice home. We have a good automobile, some money in the bank, and several other things, but we would not take anything for that letter. They meant it. Now, that mother passed away a few months later, and that son is just as attentive as he's ever been. Young people, if your parents are living today, I suggest that when you get home, get out pen and pencil. You have them here today. You may not have them tomorrow. I've only been in this congregation for about 2 years, a little bit less than that, but I've seen several men lose their wives and wives lose their husband. We have no guarantee what tomorrow may bring. Some of the saddest words that were ever uttered of Carlyle was in his diary when he said at the death of his wife, oh, that I had you again for just 5 minutes that I might tell you all. Honor thy father and thy mother. This is Christianity. This is kindness. This is love experienced. I hope that each of you have that kind of love in your heart this morning. If you're not a Christian, then the kindest thing that you could possibly do for your family is to become one. You can walk down this aisle in a few minutes and can make that confession that I believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. The baptistry is ready. We can baptize you. In less than 10 minutes, you can walk out that door free from all the sins that you committed all of your life. Live faithfully unto death, and that home that John talks about in John 14 will be yours to occupy in eternity. If you've done this years ago maybe, but have wandered back in the world and you're not as kind as you once were, God still loves you, and we do too. We want you to know that there's joy in heaven over one sinner that repented. If you're here this morning and looking for a church home, like I said, I've been here less than 2 years, but I've learned to love this congregation, the eldership, and all the members. We have devoted people here who help each other. The fact that we spend more of our budget on others than we do on ourselves. If you are interested in placing your membership here to be a worker for the Lord, we'd love to have you. And we offer the invitation at this time as we stand and sing.